In the icy silence of a snow-covered mountain town, Ethan Brooks lives a life of solitude, carrying the weight of unimaginable grief. But everything changes when he stumbles upon two young girls trapped under a frozen lake. What begins as a heroic rescue quickly spirals into a journey filled with secrets, betrayal, and a fight for redemption. Join us as we unravel Ethan's emotional journey, where the past collides with the present and a single act of courage alters the course of his life forever. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Ethan Brooks had come to find solace in the solitude of the mountains, but solace had long since abandoned him. Now in his cabin, surrounded by snow that seemed to stretch on endlessly, he was nothing more than a man marked by loss, living in a frozen world both outside and within. His wife, Emily, and his son, Noah, had been stolen from him in a car accident, and with them, the life he had once known. Since that tragic day, Ethan had avoided human connection, retreating into the mountains as if the vast wilderness could somehow fill the void inside him. He had the appearance of a man much older. His face was haggard, his hair unkempt, and his eyes, once bright with hope, were now hollow, reflecting only the relentless weight of sorrow. He rarely spoke to anyone, and when he did, his voice carried the heavy tone of someone who had no intention of being heard. The few neighbors that still lived in the nearby town had long since given up trying to reach out. They had grown used to the fact that Ethan was a man who was simply gone. One bitter morning, as Ethan walked the familiar trail through the snow, his thoughts were again consumed by the ghosts of his past. His footsteps crunched under the weight of the powdery snow, but he barely noticed the cold anymore. The harsh wind stung his face, but even that seemed distant. His thoughts only sharpened when he noticed something odd in the snow. Small, erratic footprints, child-sized. They didn't belong to any animal, and they didn't seem to follow a natural pattern. His heart, long numb, gave an involuntary jolt of concern. He wasn't sure what compelled him to follow the trail, but before he realized it, he was trudging deeper into the wilderness, the footprints leading him toward a frozen lake. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, but Ethan's focus was singular. Those prints in the snow, they led directly to the lake, where the ice was thin, and beneath it, two figures were trapped. Ethan didn't hesitate. His mind raced with fear, but his body knew what to do. The two girls beneath the ice were barely visible, their small forms shaking, their eyes wide with terror. He didn't think. He just dove into the icy water, every muscle screaming as the freezing liquid enveloped him. It didn't matter that his hands were numb, that the cold threatened to freeze him to the bone. There was only one thought in his mind: save them. For what felt like an eternity, Ethan struggled, fighting the ice, fighting the water, fighting the numbness that was quickly overtaking him. His breath was sharp, his limbs heavy, but he didn't stop. Finally, with an overwhelming surge of strength, he broke through the ice and managed to pull the girls to safety. They were pale, their lips blue, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. He wasn't sure if they were conscious, but the weight of their fragile forms in his arms felt like the heaviest thing he'd ever carried. With every ounce of his remaining energy, Ethan made his way back to his cabin. The girls pressed to his chest, their tiny, lifeless bodies clinging to him as if he were their only lifeline. He didn't understand it. He didn't know why he felt this strange sense of responsibility for them. They were strangers after all, but for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking of his past. He was thinking of them, and that thought, that desperate, irrational thought, gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. He stumbled through the snow, the weight of the two girls dragging him down, but he refused to stop. The storm was raging, the wind howling, but Ethan didn't hear it. All he could hear was the frantic beating of his own heart as he pushed forward, carrying them to safety, carrying them towards something he couldn't name. Once inside the warmth of his cabin, Ethan laid the girls down by the fire, trying to warm them, trying to revive them. They were in shock, unable to speak, their eyes vacant. His hands shook as he removed their frozen clothes and wrapped them in blankets, trying to offer the warmth they so desperately needed. But as he looked down at them, his mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Who were they? How did they end up alone on the lake? And most unsettling of all, why did it feel as though they weren't just lost girls in need of rescue, but something more? As the fire crackled softly in the background, Ethan sat by their side, waiting for them to wake, waiting for the moment when he would finally know the answers. He hadn't asked for this responsibility, but somehow it had found him. And in that silence, in that moment of waiting, Ethan realized that his own redemption, whatever it might look like, had just begun. The days following the rescue were marked by a heavy silence. Ethan did his best to care for the girls, though he didn't know how. His instincts as a father had long since faded, replaced by the shadows of grief that clung to him. But these girls, they needed him. They were no longer just children he had saved from the ice. They had become his responsibility. And though the responsibility was a burden he never asked for, it was the first spark of something resembling purpose he had felt in years. The older girl, Lily, was 6. Despite her small size, she exuded a quiet strength. She watched Ethan carefully, her wide eyes filled with something that was not fear, but caution. Sophie, the younger girl, had not spoken since the moment he found them. She clung to Lily constantly, and her eyes rarely met Ethan's. She seemed lost, her mind somewhere far away, her body physically present but emotionally absent. Ethan spent the next few days trying to keep them warm, keeping the fire roaring in the cabin's hearth, and offering them food when they could stomach it. But even though he was doing his best, it felt like a slow unraveling. There were moments when he would catch a flicker of something in Lily's eyes, something more than the blank stare of shock. It was fear, mixed with distrust, and Ethan had a sinking feeling that the girls were hiding something more than just their traumatic experience. The cabin, though small, was relatively comfortable. The walls, thick with wood and insulation, held in the warmth from the fire, and the deep snow outside kept any outside world from intruding. But that isolation was beginning to weigh heavily on him. The silence between them was suffocating. Ethan didn't know how to break it. He tried talking to them, but Lily's responses were brief, her eyes darting nervously, and Sophie remained mute, clutching her sister like a lifeline. It wasn't until the 4th day that things started to change. Ethan had gone outside to gather more firewood when he heard a sound, a soft, almost inaudible voice calling his name. Mr. Brooks. Lily's voice, tentative but there, rang through the cabin's walls. He quickly returned inside, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't prepared for this, wasn't ready to confront what was happening, but when he entered, there was something different about the girls. Lily had managed to sit up, her frail body shaking from the effort. Sophie was curled tightly beside her, looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes. I need to tell you something," Lily whispered, her voice strained as if the words were a great burden. "We're not just any girls." Ethan paused, his breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" Lily's eyes darted toward Sophie, who had pulled her blanket closer, curling into herself. There was something there, something unsaid, something that both terrified and fascinated him. Lily's face was pale, but her gaze was steady. "I don't know how to explain it," Lily continued, "but you can't let them find us. You can't let them take us back." Ethan's pulse quickened, and a sudden surge of anger mixed with fear gripped his chest. "Who's going to take you back? Who are you running from?" His voice was low, but it trembled with a strange mixture of concern and rising dread. Lily hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering between Ethan and Sophie. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Sophie, sensing the tension in the room, finally looked up, her eyes wide and full of unspoken terror. "We can't go back to them." Sophie's voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it sent a chill through Ethan's entire body. The silence in the cabin thickened, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Ethan didn't know who they were, or why the girls seemed so afraid. All he knew was that something far darker was at play here, something much bigger than him. He stared at the two of them, feeling the full force of their fear settle in his chest. "You're safe here," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as if trying to convince himself as much as the girls. "I won't let anyone hurt you." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Who were they running from? What danger had followed them to this remote, snow-covered cabin? And why had they ended up alone on that lake, in the middle of nowhere? Ethan's mind spun with questions, but he pushed them aside for the moment. He had to protect them. That was all that mattered now. But as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Ethan's thoughts lingered on the girl's words. Who were they, and what had happened to make these two innocent children so terrified? The storm outside continued to rage, the snow falling in thick sheets that seemed to isolate the cabin further from the world. But the more Ethan tried to block out the fear gnawing at his gut, the more he realized one undeniable truth. The girls weren't just lost, they were in danger, and the weight of that danger was far heavier than the snow falling outside. As the night drew on, Ethan stayed by the fire, watching over them. He knew there was more to this story than he understood, but one thing was clear. His life was no longer just about surviving his own grief. It was about keeping these girls safe, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that they never went back to whatever or whoever was chasing them. The wind howled louder outside, but it wasn't the storm that made the cabin feel like it was closing in. It was the secrets. The things the girls had yet to say, the things they had yet to reveal. And Ethan was beginning to realize that nothing about this was going to be simple. The days continued to blur together, each one feeling longer than the last. The storm outside showed no signs of relenting, and inside the cabin, the tension hung thick in the air, suffocating all attempts at normalcy. Ethan spent his time trying to keep the girls comfortable, tending to them with an intensity that seemed to surprise him. He'd never imagined he could care for someone again, but something about these girls, their fragility, their silent strength, stirred something in him. Still, despite his best efforts, a nagging unease tugged at him, the sense that there was something important he wasn't being told. Lily remained withdrawn, but every so often he caught her watching him with a strange, almost calculating look. Sophie, too, was quieter than usual, but there was a distant sadness in her eyes that Ethan couldn't ignore. Neither girl spoke much about what had happened, and Ethan didn't press them. He had his own ghosts to contend with, his own battles to fight. But the silence between them was growing heavier by the day, and it was becoming harder to pretend that everything was okay. It was on the 6th day after the rescue that the door to his cabin was knocked on once again. This time, Ethan was prepared. The same chill ran through him, but there was something different about the knock, a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. He had been pacing the small living room, trying to figure out what to do next, when he heard the unmistakable sound of someone outside. Without thinking, he moved quickly to the door, his heart racing. When he opened it, he was greeted by a man who looked out of place in the quiet of the mountains. He was tall, dressed in an expensive-looking coat that looked absurdly out of place against the backdrop of the snow-covered landscape. His sharp, calculating eyes locked onto Ethan with a knowing look. "Ethan Brooks." The man's voice was firm, commanding. "We need to talk." Ethan froze, unsure of what to say. Sure. He instinctively stepped back, blocking the man's entry, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a badge, flashing it quickly before Ethan could fully register it. "I'm with the FBI. My name is David Corbin." He paused, as if waiting for Ethan to process the information. "I'm looking for two girls, Lily and Sophie Hunter." The name hit Ethan like a slap. Hunter. He had heard the name before, but it didn't make sense. These girls, these fragile, terrified children, were the daughters of a family with such power. The realization shocked him, but he kept his face neutral, not letting the surprise show. "Hunter?" Ethan echoed, trying to process the words. "I don't know any Hunter." Corbin's eyes narrowed. "You don't need to lie to me. We know they're here. The search for them has been underway for weeks. I'm here to bring them home." The words struck like a bolt of lightning, and for a moment Ethan felt the ground beneath him shift. The urgency in the man's voice made it clear that these weren't ordinary missing children. There was more at stake than just their well-being. Ethan didn't know what to do. He was a man who had never been involved in anything larger than his own grief. Now suddenly, he was standing in the middle of something far bigger than he had imagined. The girls weren't just lost. They were part of something much darker, a game he didn't understand. "I'm not handing them over to you," Ethan said, his voice more forceful than he intended. Corbin didn't react immediately. He studied Ethan for a moment, then spoke again, his tone softer but no less serious. "You don't have a choice, Mr. Brooks. These girls are in danger. You don't know the whole story, but I do. They need to come with me." "Why?" Ethan demanded, his anger flaring. "What danger are they in?" Corbin hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking toward the cabin. "You don't want to get involved in this," he warned. "This is much bigger than you or me. I'm not asking you to understand, I'm asking you to trust me." Ethan could feel the heat rising in his chest, the protective instincts he had buried for so long, suddenly coming to the surface. The thought of letting these girls go, of returning them to whatever nightmare they had escaped, filled him with a deep, visceral dread. The girls had barely spoken, but their fear was unmistakable. They were running from something, and Ethan knew that whatever it was, he wasn't about to send them back into the fire. "No," Ethan said firmly, "I'm not handing them over to you, not until I know the full story." Corbin's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what's at stake here." Ethan's mind raced as the door to his cabin swung shut, the FBI agent's warning hanging in the air. His breath came in sharp bursts as his heart pounded in his chest. There were too many unknowns, too many questions. But one thing was becoming clear. These girls weren't just victims of circumstance. They were pieces in a game he had no interest in playing. As Ethan turned back to the girls, he felt the weight of his decision settle over him. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was brewing inside him. He had to protect them, that much was certain. But he didn't know who to trust anymore. Lily, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke, her voice small but insistent. "You can't let them take us. They don't want us to be safe." Ethan's heart twisted as he looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. He hadn't been wrong. This was bigger than he had ever imagined, and now he was in the middle of it. There was no turning back. The storm outside grew fiercer, and for the first time since he had rescued the girls, Ethan felt a creeping sense of dread wash over him. The world outside was closing in, and the only thing that mattered now was keeping them safe, no matter the cost. The fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to ease the chill in Ethan's bones. His heart raced, thoughts spiraling. The encounter with the FBI agent David Corbin had left him rattled. Everything he thought he knew had been upended. These girls, the ones he had taken in and cared for, were not just lost children. They were part of something he wasn't equipped to understand. And now, Corbin's warning echoed in his mind. "You don't know the whole story." Ethan stood in the dim light of the cabin, his eyes fixed on Lily and Sophie, who huddled together in the corner. Their expressions had shifted, gone from fear to something darker, more resigned. They knew something he didn't, something he had to figure out, and fast. "Ethan!" Lily's voice broke the silence, her tone soft but edged with urgency. "We can't go back. You don't understand." Ethan's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "What are you talking about? Who are they? What happened to you?" Lily looked down at Sophie, then back at Ethan, her small hands tightly clutching her sister's. For a moment, it seemed as if she was weighing how much to reveal. Then with a deep breath, she finally spoke. "They're not what they seem. We're not just kids. Our mother, she's the one who's dangerous." Lily's voice faltered. "Amanda Hunter. She's a businesswoman, but she's part of something bigger, something bad." The name Amanda Hunter hit Ethan like a sledgehammer. He had heard it before in the news, in hushed whispers from locals. Amanda Hunter was a billionaire, the owner of a vast corporate empire. Her name was associated with power, wealth, and influence, but nothing ever suggested the kind of danger Lily was describing. Now, standing in his cabin, it felt like the walls were closing in on him. What do you mean? What is she involved in? Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though his heart was pounding in his chest. She's part of a big corporation. They don't care about people, Ethan. They use people. They hurt people, Lily explained, her voice barely above a whisper. And she's not the only one. There are others. They all have power, and they use it to hurt people like us. We couldn't stay with her. She doesn't care about us. Ethan's mind raced. These weren't just innocent girls. They were running from something much darker than he had ever imagined. The gravity of their situation hit him hard. The FBI agent Corbin wasn't just a concerned government official. He was part of a larger system, part of the same world Amanda Hunter inhabited, a world of wealth, influence, and possibly corruption. And if Lily's words were true, this wasn't just a simple case of a missing persons search. This was far bigger. Ethan paced the room, his thoughts spiraling. He had no idea what to do. He couldn't simply hand the girls over to Corbin, not when it seemed like they were in more danger with him than without him. And yet, the pressure was mounting. The FBI wouldn't stop searching for them. They couldn't stay in the mountains forever. But where could they go? Who could they trust? Sophie, who had been silent for most of their conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, she hurt us. She let them hurt us." Her voice was trembling, full of fear and sadness. "We ran away." Ethan's stomach twisted in knots. He could hear the deep pain in Sophie's voice. She was just a little girl, barely old enough to understand the full extent of what she had been through. He didn't know what to say, how to offer comfort to someone who had been through so much. Lily's gaze softened as she looked at her sister, then back at Ethan. "We don't have a family anymore. Ethan, we don't have anyone but you." The words hit him like a blow to the chest. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't even sure he could be a good father. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let them go. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. The world outside, with its corporate greed and corruption, didn't care about these girls, but Ethan did. They weren't just pieces in some cruel game. They were human beings who had been broken by the very system that was supposed to protect them. He clenched his fists, a sense of resolve hardening in his chest. He couldn't let Amanda Hunter and her powerful network take them back. He didn't know how, but he would protect them, no matter what. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling through the trees. Ethan stood by the window, his breath fogging up the glass as he watched the snow swirl outside. He didn't know how long he could keep them hidden. The FBI would never stop looking. And if Corbin wasn't lying, Amanda Hunter was a force to be reckoned with. She wasn't going to let her daughters disappear into the wilderness without a fight. But Ethan wasn't going to let them take the girls back, not without a fight of his own. His resolve was clear. He needed to find a way to protect them, to get them out of this mess. He couldn't let Amanda Hunter's world consume them, and he wouldn't let it destroy him either. Lily's quiet voice broke through his thoughts. "Thank you, Ethan. We knew we could trust you. You're the only one who cares about us." The sincerity in her words struck him deeply. He had never felt like he belonged to anything in years, but in that moment, he realized that these girls were his family now. They didn't have a place to call home, but Ethan could give them something more important, safety, and that's what he would fight for, no matter the cost. As the storm raged outside, Ethan's mind churned with plans. He couldn't let the world outside tear apart what little hope the girls had left, but time was running out. He had to make a choice, and soon. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the cabin as the snow piled up deeper and deeper. Inside, the tension was almost unbearable. Ethan had spent the last few days trying to figure out what to do. The storm had cut him off from the outside world, but he knew the peace wouldn't last forever. The FBI would be back, and Amanda Hunter would not stop until her daughters were returned to her. But Ethan wasn't sure he could give them up. Not after everything that had happened, not after hearing their story, seeing the terror in their eyes, and understanding just how deep the danger ran. It wasn't just about rescuing them anymore. It was about keeping them safe, keeping them away from a world that had no place for them, a world that had no mercy. The decision weighed on him more heavily with each passing hour. He couldn't continue to hide them forever. The authorities were already looking for them, and the isolation of the cabin couldn't shield them indefinitely. He was going to have to leave. He just didn't know where to go. Ethan sat in the living room, staring into the crackling fire, lost in thought. The girls had been quiet for days, their eyes distant as they sat by the fire. Every now and then Lily would glance at him, her face filled with quiet gratitude, but also fear. She knew, as Ethan did, that the longer they stayed, the closer they were to being found. Sophie, who had been silent for so long, suddenly spoke up, her voice barely a whisper, but it held an unmistakable determination. "We don't want to go back to her," she said, her small voice shaking but firm. "We're scared." Ethan's heart clenched at the sound of her words. He looked at the two girls, their faces pale, their bodies still small and fragile. The weight of their pain seemed too much to bear, and yet here they were, placing their trust in him. "I know," Ethan said softly, leaning forward in his chair. "I know you're scared, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe. I won't let her take you back, not after what she's done." Lily reached over and took Sophie's hand, her small fingers trembling. She didn't say anything, but her eyes met Ethan's with a look that seemed to communicate everything she couldn't put into words. She believed him. They both did, but Ethan knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Amanda Hunter was a force to be reckoned with, and if Corbin was to be believed, she had resources that could track them down in no time. But he couldn't just turn them over, not now, not after seeing the terror in their eyes. The only option left was to leave. But where could they go? And what if it was too late? The door to the cabin opened, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't prepared for this. Standing in the doorway, covered in snow, was the last person he expected to see. David Corbin, the FBI agent. Ethan froze. Corbin's eyes locked onto him, and for a long moment there was nothing but silence. The storm raged outside, but in that instant it felt as if time had stopped. "I warned you, Ethan," Corbin said, his voice steady but carrying a sharp edge. "You should have listened to me." Ethan didn't know what to say. The man standing in front of him was part of the very world the girls had run from. How could Ethan trust him? "What do you want?" Ethan's voice was strained, his anger barely held in check. Corbin stepped inside, brushing the snow off his coat, and closed the door behind him. "I'm not here to fight with you, Ethan," he said, his tone softer. "I'm here because it's too late to run. You can't hide them forever." Ethan stood up, his fists clenched, every instinct telling him to protect the girls, to keep them safe. "I'm not giving them to you," he said firmly. "Not now. Not ever." Corbin's gaze softened for a brief moment, but then hardened again. "You don't understand. This isn't about you, or me, or the girls. It's about a much bigger picture. They're in danger, real danger, Ethan. You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Ethan said, his voice low, full of defiance. "I'm dealing with two little girls who've been through hell, and I'm not going to send them back to that." Corbin sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right. I don't want to take them back, but you don't understand the kind of people we're up against. Amanda Hunter isn't just some wealthy businesswoman. She's involved in things that go far beyond corporate greed. There are lives at stake here. If you don't help me, if you don't let me take them, the consequences will be worse than you can imagine." Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't deny the gravity of the situation, but he also couldn't abandon the girls. His heart, the same one that had been shattered years ago, was fighting against all his instincts. "What do you expect me to do?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "I can't just hand them over. I'm not asking you to hand them over, Ethan," Corbin interrupted. "I'm asking you to trust me. They need to be safe, and the only way that happens is if they come with me. You're not in this alone anymore. I'm offering you a chance to keep them safe, for good." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't want to let them go, but what choice did he have? They were running out of time. He had to make a decision, one that would define not just the girls' futures, but his own. As he looked at Lily and Sophie, who were silently watching him from the corner, he knew what he had to do. Ethan turned to Corbin, his voice steady, despite the turmoil inside him. "If I let you take them, what happens to them? Will they be safe?" "They will be," Corbin said. "I promise you that. But this isn't something I can do alone. I need your help." Ethan felt a heavy weight lift from his shoulders. There was no perfect solution, no perfect answer, but there was only one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't keep running. "I'll help," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But you need to protect them, for real this time." Corbin nodded. "You have my word." Ethan glanced back at the girls one last time, then turned and stepped toward the door. They weren't just his responsibility anymore. The storm was still raging outside, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he was making the right choice. He would see them safe, and if it meant going to hell and back, he would make sure Amanda Hunter never got near them again.